good morning. My name is Eric. I'm the lead whatever the pastor is, senior pastor? Emphasis on the senior part. I'm the senior pastor here. I just want to welcome you. So anyway, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of continue this true story that we started on last week. If you weren't here last week, I really encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and watch it because it's really, we talked about dropping our nets, and that's what Jessica's talking about, being on the legendary team. So if you want to be a part of dropping your nets and following Jesus and do whatever it takes, see Darlene out there at the tent, and she can get you hooked up, and you get a free crumble cookie. That's what I'm talking about now. Anyway, so we're going to continue that story of a true story, and it's the true story of about the life of Peter. Simon Peter, Jesus' probably most famous disciple. Now, Simon Peter was probably illiterate. He could probably read a little bit, but he definitely couldn't write because in that day and age, 90% of rural people lived in the in the country, they couldn't write because writing was expensive and took practice. So he actually dictated his story to a man named John Mark, his story comes to us in the form of what we call the book of Mark. So Peter, who spent 3 years with Jesus, and then he spent 30 years walking around or traveling around telling his story of his encounters with Jesus. And Mark was with him during those 30 years as they record these things. Well, history shows us that one day Peter is in Rome, he's in a jail cell and awaiting execution. And what happens is Mark actually says, hey, listen, those stories you've been sharing for 30 years, that's just great for this generation, but we need to record this. So one more time, tell me the story, your story about your time with Jesus. And then what you'll notice when you read the book of Mark, it looks like Peter just he's downloading it. It's here and there, it's chaotic, it's out of order, and it's fast-paced. It says immediately they did this, and then they did this, and it's almost like you get the picture of them sitting in a jail cell. Peter knows he doesn't have much time, so he's just throwing it out, vomiting it out there, and Mark is just recording it. Now, when you read it, you'll find out, and we're going to look at some of this today, that Peter doesn't leave out the embarrassing parts. You know, most of the time when you look at culture or history, the one who writes history usually makes themselves look good. But Peter doesn't do that. He keeps all of his most embarrassing parts of his story in the story for us to read about 2,000 years later. And the reason is because his story is part of the greatest story ever told, and that's the story of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And it got me thinking that when we decide to follow Jesus, maybe you're here this morning and you're just kind of checking it out. Many of us here, we've decided that we're going all in, we're going to follow Jesus. What I realize is that most of us have some kind of checkered past, or in fact, we say this, if you're looking for a perfect church, this isn't it. If you've got a few screws loose and a checkered past, then this is probably the right place for you. And the thing is that when you decide to follow Jesus, most people leave that checkered past or those embarrassing moments in because it's part of our encounter with our Savior. In fact, you rarely hear somebody that says, yeah, I was living a perfect life and then I met God. Because when you're living a perfect life, who needs God, right? I only know of really one or two people, one of them being the Apostle Paul. If you read the Apostle Paul, that's what he said. He goes, when it came to sin, he goes, I didn't have any, I was perfect. But then I met Jesus. And so Peter leaves those stories in there for us because it's part of the greatest story that's ever told. Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to pick it up. And we're going to pick up that story. And it's a part of the story where his disciples have traveled north to a place called Caesarea Philippi. Here's our map from last week. See Caesarea Philippi? That's way up here in the north, okay? And Caesarea Philippi, something significant happens there. Jesus brings his 12 disciples up there, and while they're up there, he asks this question. He says, hey, what's the word on the street about me, guys? What are people saying about me? And they say, well, some say you're a prophet from old. Some say you're like Elijah. Some say you're John the Baptist reincarnated. And then Jesus asks this question. He says, what about you? You've been with me for quite a while now. Who do you think I am? And Peter answers and says, well, we believe that you are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. And it's kind of interesting because when Peter says this, Jesus doesn't go, come on, Peter, you're too much. Don't give me that stuff. He actually agrees with him and says, you're exactly right. And on that statement, that I am uniquely sent from God, on that statement, I'm going to build and I'm going to establish a brand new movement. A brand new movement. He calls it ecclesia, which is the Greek word where we get the word church. But what it means is an organization or a movement or a gathering of people. And he says, I'm going to establish this gathering of people, and nothing is going to be able to stop it. So after saying that, they began their journey south. So they're in Caesarea Philippi, and they begin their journey south. They go through Capernaum, that's where Peter's from, the Sea of Galilee, and they begin their journey to Jerusalem, down the Jordan River to where he's going to be going to Jerusalem, and he talks about what's going to happen there. And as they travel, he reminds them once again of what to expect when they get to Jerusalem, and that's where we're going to pick it up in Mark chapter 8. And the scriptures are going to be on the screen. The story's going to be on the screen, but if you want to read the notes for yourself, you can download our app and it's on there. And here's what he says. It says, and this is Peter. Remember, this is Peter dictating this to Mark. He says, he then began, they're on their way down to Jerusalem, down the Jordan River. He says, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and here's one of Peter's embarrassing moments. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. And I just think, later on, I think when James and John and Peter got together, they probably were like, remember Peter when you actually rebuked Jesus? He was like, shut up, man. Peter the rebuker, Peter the rebuker. He rebukes Jesus. Basically, he says, don't talk that way. That's what he's telling him. Don't talk like that. But Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and he looks at the disciples, so Peter took him aside, so it's Peter and Jesus standing over here. Jesus looks at the disciples, and then he says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. So not only did you have this great revelation, Peter had this great revelation, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, but then that same person that you said that to calls you the devil, all right? I don't know, Satan. Mama says Peter the devil. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And basically what he's saying is like, you want a king like all the other kings. But I'm not that kind of king, and I didn't come to bring that kind of kingdom. We talked about this last week. I didn't come to bring that kind of kingdom. I came for a different reason. And then to kind of emphasize the point, he gathers his disciples and the crowd. So it wasn't just 12 following him. There was a crowd of people that were following him. And he gathers them because he wants them to hear what he has to say as they continue towards Jerusalem. So verse 34 says, then he called the crowd to him along with the disciples. And then he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. At this point, I'm sure that it was like a bowling alley. You could have heard a pin drop. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, I'll be here all week, right? Dad joke. Anyway, here's what he's saying. This isn't gonna be fun anymore, okay? I know that I called you and said, follow me, but listen, it's not gonna be, oh, look, you're disciples of the new rabbi. I'm telling you right now, it's not gonna be like a parade welcoming you into Jerusalem. It's not gonna be a music festival. From now on, if you decide to follow me to Jerusalem, it's gonna cost you something. You're gonna have to pick up your cross. Now, when he says that, for us, that's symbolic. All right? Oh, that's just the cross I have to bear. My husband burps at dinner tables. That's the cross I have to bear. It's kind of a symbolic thing. But for them, it was literal. In this day and age, this was literal. They had seen crucifixions. They had smelled crucifixions. They'd heard the cries. Maybe they'd even known somebody or one of their loved ones had been crucified. And so Jesus is saying, listen, I'm just telling you from here on out, if you're going to follow me, it's not going to be easy. You're going to suffer. It's going to cost you something to follow me. But disguised in this kind of ominous description, if there would have been a soundtrack, it would have went, dun, dun. There's this extraordinary invitation, because look what he says next. He says, for whoever wants to save their life, which would be all of us, right? Nobody, we are going to, you would do anything to keep your life. He says, for whoever wants to save their life, which is all of us, will lose it. And this was his fancy way of saying, look, everybody dies, okay? It doesn't matter how healthy you are or how much you work out, which is why I don't know. It doesn't matter because everybody's gonna die, right? No matter how hard you work to preserve yourself, you're going to die. Everybody loses their life. But if in the meantime you only live for yourself, then you only have yourself to show for yourself when you get to the end. So he says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. And in this moment, standing there along the Jordan River, he was inviting them, and he invites us to heed the call to live our life with purpose. So now Peter and the boys, they have a decision to make. They're headed down through Galilee. They can just stay there because it's too hard to follow, and they can just fish the rest of their lives and die old men in their beds and just kind of be forgotten. Or they can heed the call to live a life of purpose. Because everyone ends up somewhere. You're going to end up somewhere. Every one of us end up somewhere, but only those who are intentional end up where they want to be on purpose. And I think, just like the disciples, we have a decision to make as well. We can be consumed with preserving our lives. That's always the temptation. I want to live my life. I want to do what I want to do. I want to gather these things, and I want to have pleasure, and I want to have fun and all that, knowing at the end we will never preserve them, which means we're going to continue to say yes to our fear, because our fear is of letting go of control and giving it to God. But you know what happens when we say yes to fear? Fear always invites us to follow the path of self-preservation. I'm going to say that again. You might want to tweet it because it's good. Fear always invites you to journey down the path of self-preservation. Because I'm afraid, I want to hold on to my life, so I'm going to do whatever I can to keep it. But Jesus knew that if you follow that path long enough, you will neither preserve your life, nor you will ever do anything significant to show for your life. And so this question that he proposed to his first century followers extends to us as well. Will we follow Jesus? Will we heed the call? Now, there's a very disturbing question that Graham has talked about, and I've talked about it before, that I believe is kind of the crux of heeding the call. It helps us understand what it means. And the question goes like this, is what does love require? When it comes to any kind of situation or any kind of crisis or anything that I'm facing, if I can ask this question right now, in this moment, what does love require of me? It will help me understand what it means to heed the call and actually decide to let go of that self-preservation. Because I'm sure that Peter never forgot this day. Probably never forgot the fear, the confusion, the uncertainty. Probably wondered, was he making the right decision? Would it be easier to stay in Galilee and just fish? Or would it be better that even though it's going to cost me, I'm going to still follow this rabbi? Now, he made the decision to follow the rabbi because if he didn't, we wouldn't even know his story, because it wouldn't have been a story worth telling. But now, because he made this decision that I'm going to follow Jesus, his story is worth telling, which brings me to kind of a rabbit trail, if you would, and that's this. When it comes to our stories, when my story of blank, in other words, you fill it in. When my story of being homeless for 5 months, my wife and I were homeless and lived in the church parking lot for 5 months, and I love to tell that story. When my story of my father passing away, when my story of someone betraying me that I trusted, when my story of what's going on right now where we're preparing to leave this church to the next generation, when you tell your story of your child who won't talk to you, your story of addiction, the story of the diagnosis that you received, or the spouse that's left you, or the infertility. When you tell your story of that unfortunate accident, when you tell that story that maybe a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, the question and the challenge for me and you is, when I tell that story, let's make sure our stories are worth telling. Will it be a story that's worth telling? And the decisions when you're going through whatever you're going through, the decisions that you make every single day will determine the stories that you tell to your kids one day. It'll determine the stories that you tell to your grandchildren. So as easy as it is to retreat to our fear, to hold on to our life, to preserve our life, retreating does not necessarily preserve your life. In fact, retreating to your fear, what it does is that you lose the opportunity to do something significant and trust God and see him work in your life. So the boys, Peter and the disciples, they decide that they're going to follow Jesus. And so they start to head south toward Jerusalem. And here's what it says. It says, they left that place and passed through Galilee. So they're leaving Caesarea Philippi. They're going through Galilee. Hello? Map, please. There they are. So they left Caesarea Philippi, and so now they're leaving Galilee, and they're heading down to, it says they were heading on their way up to Jerusalem, which I would say down, because I'm a map guy. Any map people? And yeah, I hate when people go, yeah, we're going up to Miami. That's down to Miami, okay? That's south. But the reason why they would say up when you read the scriptures is because this right here, the Jordan River goes down here, and by the time it gets down here, it's below sea level. And Jerusalem was in the mountains, so they would have to go up. So they always talk about going up to Jerusalem. So they left that place, passed through Galilee. They were on their way to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, which is so weird when you think about it. It's amazing because after all of these warnings, he just sat there and told them of what's going to happen. He's going to be handed over to the Romans. They're going to spit on him, mock him, flog him, and crucify him, be put to death. And here they are heading down the Jordan River, and Jesus is out in front. He's got a beeline to get to Jerusalem. He's out in front of them, okay, which is kind of probably confusing. Wait a minute. I know it had to be confusing to the disciples and maybe the crowd. This guy's talking about sacrificing his life, being killed in Jerusalem, and he's like headed there. And so once again, though, he warns them again about what he's about to face. In chapter 10, he says, they're on their way back up with Jerusalem, with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. So they're confused, they're scared. And he takes the 12 aside, and he told them what was going to happen to him. We're going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and they will condemn him to death, and they will hand him over to the Gentiles, the Romans, who will mock him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. Now look at this. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, they came to him, all right? So they kind of run up to catch up with Jesus. And remember, this is kind of funny. This is immediately after this graphic demonstration that he tells of this graphic explanation. I mean, the Son of Man's going to be mocked. He's going to be spit on. He's going to be flogged. He's going to be handed over to the Romans, and they're going to put him to death. And so they're there. And so Jesus is out ahead. And so James and John kind of run ahead to get ahead to talk to Jesus. And so they come to him, James and John, the son of Zebedee, and they say, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever you ask." They're like, hey, all of that mocking and spitting and flogging, that's really horrible. Will you do us a favor, right? And Jesus is so patient. Look what he says. Verse 36, "What do you want me to do for you?" I'm thinking, glad I'm not Jesus, right? And I know you guys are too. Because I'd be like, did you just not hear what I said? He's like, what do you want me to do for you? Now, we're going to come back to this. So this is a really important statement. What do you want me to do for you? They replied, verse 37, "Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left hand in your glory." Hey, Jesus, you know all that spitting and flogging and mocking and crucifixion? Once you've established your kingdom, we want positions of, not before that, after the mocking and stuff. Can we have positions of authority? And Jesus is like, boys, you don't know what you're asking for. You don't get it, do you? I mean, you're asking to sit at my right hand and my left. That's not mine to give, but I don't think you get it. And so a few verses later, here's what happens. This is hilarious. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. So they are upset. They're like, you insensitive jerks. Didn't you hear? No, that's not what they were upset about. You know what they're upset about? Just like your kids. I called shotgun. No, I want to sit at his right hand. No, I want to sit. No, I'm better than you. Are you kidding me? Thomas, you doubt all the time everything Jesus says, right? And suddenly an argument breaks out on the road while Jesus is saying all this stuff about being mocked and spit on and flogged and put to death. They start talking about, no, I'm the greatest. No, I'm the greatest. I'm the greatest. I'm the GOAT. I'm the greatest of all time. Now, Jesus has already covered this 2 or 3 times. And so he calls them together, verse 42, and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, the Romans, Gentiles, lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority of them. In other words, look, guys, you know how the Roman world works, right? You know how the world works, the Gentile world works, how rulers mercilessly, when they get the power, they rule mercilessly over everybody else, right? In fact, I kind of have I did a paraphrase version. So this would be the Eric Bible, okay? Here's how I wrote verse 42. You know that those in positions of authority leverage their authority for their own benefit, right? In other words, you know how the world works, guys. You know how it works where they use their authority to have more authority. In fact, I wrote another paraphrase version, and this one's for the United States government. It says, you know that those who with resources and influence leverage their resources and influence to gain more resources and influence for themselves, right? That's what he's saying. You know how the world works, right? You know how it works is when someone has power, they don't use the power necessarily for the benefit of other people. They take the power and the resources in order to get more power and resources. Got it? You know how it works. And they're like, yeah, we get it. That's why we wanted to sit at your right hand and your left hand. In other words, when you come into your kingdom and you're at the top of the pyramid, can we be right underneath you? And then Jesus, I think he just pauses and looks at them. And then he says 4 words that every time I read them, they stop me in my tracks. I mean, these 4 words, when I listen to these 4 words and put them into practice, I think I'm a better leader, but when I don't, I become self-absorbed. I become one of those people that's trying to preserve my life. Here's what he says. So he says, listen, you guys, if you want to follow me, you're going to have to pick up your cross. You're going to have to deny yourself. You're going to have to follow me. And they want to be, he says, and the greatest, come on, this whole idea of being the greatest sinner, my right hand and my left, that's how the Gentiles do it. That's how the Romans do it. That's how the world works. But not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. In other words, no, I want to sit at your right hand. I want to sit at your left. No, I'm greater. Oh, hold on. That's not the way it works with you guys. Not so with you. You want to be great. You want to be the greatest of the disciples, then you need to serve the rest of them. You want to be the greatest in all the kingdom, then you need to become a slave. He says, and this is why, for even the Son of Man, even I did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Any questions, guys? James, John, Peter, you good? All right, let's go to Jerusalem. This had to be really confusing to them. Think about this. Our life is a ransom, pick up your cross, deny yourself, give up your life. They were probably thinking, do we have time to turn around and go back up and fish in Galilee? So Peter continues his story. Remember, he's given it to Mark. Mark's writing all this down. They continue on, and they finally make their way from Jerusalem to Jericho. And something extraordinary happens in Jericho. We're going to pick that up in verse 46. Then they came to Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, so now they're going to head up to Jerusalem, they meet a man named Bartimaeus. We call him blind Bartimaeus, which is son of Timaeus. He was sitting by the roadside begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout because word's getting around about this guy. Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. So the people around him are like, hey, don't bother the rabbi. He's important. Shut up, keep it down. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And now remember, again, Peter's telling this story to Mark, and Mark's writing all this down. And I just think that Peter, it's not in the text, but Peter is probably like, we couldn't believe it. Because here is Jesus, he's making a beeline to Jerusalem. He's out in front of us. We're having a hard time keeping up with him. And then this blind man is calling his name, and look at the next verse. And Jesus stopped. He actually stopped. He actually stopped to illustrate his message. He actually stopped to illustrate what his kingdom would look like. He stopped to illustrate that he was introducing an upside down kingdom where people would use their power and their resources not for themselves, but use their power and their resources for people who had less power. They would leverage their own power, their own resources, their own authority for people who have less power and fewer resources. Now think about this. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for his most important most important appointment of his life, to go to the cross. And he stops to minister to this man. This is so convicting to me because I'm anybody busy in here? I'm busy. I'm busy too. And this is what I see in this is that sometimes following Jesus requires you to stop. And the reason why this is so convicting, on the front row is my friend Pastor Dave right here. Pastor Dave, could you wave at everybody? I worked with Pastor Dave for 17 years at East Coast Christian Center. In fact, our Pastor Dan, who spoke here a couple weeks ago, remember him? So we worked in the same church. And one of the things that used to frustrate me, did it ever frustrate you, Dave? Was the pastor on call. And then what they would do is, because we had like 5 pastors, so every day a pastor would be on call. So you could be working and and that's happened to me one day. I'm sitting there, I'm getting ready for youth ministry because I'm the youth pastor, so I'm working on my message, and I get the secretary calls, Pastor Eric, there's a man here off the street that needs to see a pastor. And I'm like, come on, I've got a deadline. I got to get ready to preach, and now some guy coming in off the street. I mean, you can't make an appointment with a lawyer. I mean, you can't come in off the street to see a lawyer. You got to make an appointment, right? You can't go see a doctor off the street. You got to make an appointment. Well, I'm a pastor, okay? They need to make an appointment. And I remember God saying to me, that's what ministry is all about. In fact, he kind of showed me the story of the woman when Jesus is on his way to heal somebody whose daughter is dying, and a woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years grabs his cloak and he turns around and ministers to her. He's on his way to a kid who's dying, and he ministers to this person. See, sometimes if we're going to follow Jesus, it requires stopping. And Mark tells us, continues this statement, Jesus stopped and said, call him. And throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet. I could just see the people around him that were going, shut up, man. Don't bother the guy. Jesus, Jesus. And they go, hey, come over here. And they're like, hey, he's calling you. Go see him. Go see him. I hope they helped him because he was blind. You know, I'd hate to see him. They got the cameras out. Look, he hit a telephone pole. You know, he said, so he says, come, throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. And then when he gets to Jesus makes this extraordinary statement that when you read, if you really think about this statement, you wouldn't write this in if it wasn't true. You wouldn't put this statement in the story because it kind of makes Jesus look like he's teasing this guy or making fun of this guy. Because, you know, sometimes Jesus said a lot of things that confused the disciples. He says some things that confused me. But if you were making this up, you wouldn't put this in here because if you don't know any better, it seems like Jesus is making fun of this guy. But I believe that Jesus asked this question to blind Bartimaeus because not for his sake, but kind of for the sake of his disciples, for that whole thing that he just went through with them. The whole, hey, we're the greatest, I'm the greatest. No, I want to sit at your right hand. Look at the statement, the question that he asks. And he says, what do you want me to, I just believe that he had to, when he asked the question, he probably looked over at James and John and says, what do you want me to do for you? Because remember, that's the question that he asked them. Hey, Jesus, we want to sit by your right hand. We want to sit on your left. Okay, yeah, I get all the flogging and crucifixion thing, but can we sit on your right hand and your left? He says, you don't know what you're asking. And then he says to this blind man, what do you want me to do for you? Probably looked over at the disciples, and the blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. I'm telling you, that is a good thing to ask for. God, give me vision. Could you imagine if James and John had asked for that? When he talks about the crucifixion, he talks about flogging and the Son of Man, because, you know, they believed that he was the Messiah. The Messiah can't die. That's why Peter rebuked Jesus. What are you talking about? You're the Messiah. You're not going to die. You're our king. You're going to usher in the kingdom. And when you get there, can we sit on your right hand and your left hand? Right? What if they would have said, what if James and John would have come to Jesus and said, Jesus, we really don't understand what you're talking about. Could you help us see like you're seeing? Can you imagine if they'd asked that question? Could you help us see the way you see? Because then I bet things would have been completely different. And this is a prayer I pray all the time. This is a prayer I pray when I'm in a situation, when I'm maybe dealing with a tough situation between two different parties or whatever it is. I pray, God, would you help me to see the way that you see? God, would you help me to see me the way you see me? Would you help me to see my wife? Would you help me to see my family? Would you help me to see my church? Would you help me to see my community the way you see my community? Would you help me see that homeless person the way you see that homeless person? Would you help me see that marginalized person the way you see that marginalized? Would you help me see that person who is attacking the church the way you see him? You know what happens? Because, see, if I can see as God sees, I'll be more inclined to do as God says. But if I keep on insisting and seeing the way I see, I'm going to be less inclined to do what God says. So he says, Rabbi, I want to see. Verse 52, Jesus says, go. Your faith has healed you. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Now, I want to circle back to verse 43, where he said, listen, the Gentiles, this is what they do. They rule over each other. They gather authority, they gather power, and they gather resources so they can have more power and more resources, and they leverage it for himself. And then Jesus says, but not so with you. Not so with you. So here's the question I want to leave you with this morning. What would it look like in your world, your family, your work, where you go to school, your community? What would it look like if you became a not so with you leader? What would that look like? Because when you choose to follow Jesus, when you choose to heed the call, that's what this series is about, Jesus will always lead you in this direction. You know, I love the story of Follow Me. And in fact, way back in the beginning when Jesus met the disciples, and John describes it this way, that the Andrew and Peter, they were so amazed at Jesus. They said, where are you staying? And Jesus goes, follow me. And he'd say to Matthew, follow me. And it sounds so simple and so easy. Oh, follow me. In fact, maybe you're following Jesus because a preacher like me stood on a stage like this and said, oh, just follow him. That's all he requires. And your life's going to be good and your life will be great and grand. It is true, but Jesus will always lead you in this direction. He will lead you. So any of us who have any kind of influence, any of us who have any kind of leadership, Jesus will always lead us to this point where we make a decision that it's not about me, it's about what God wants for me. Which leads us to the big idea for today, and that's this. Leverage your power and resources for the benefit of those with less power and fewer resources. Ultimately, if you're in any kind of leadership, that's the challenge that God's going to lead you to, whether it's leadership in the church, a family, at work, whatever, is will you take the power and the resources that you have, and instead of using it for yourself to accumulate more power and more resources, will you leverage it for those who have less power and less resources? Or to put it like this, the law of Christ. In other words, to love the way God loved us. That's what Jesus said on his last day. He says, I'm giving you another commandment, not another one to add to the 10. I'm giving you one commandment. Love others the way I've loved you. It's called the law of Christ or the law of love. And Peter, a week later, would find himself in the back of a crowd watching this play out in real time as he watched his rabbi give his life as a ransom for many. Now, it wasn't until after the resurrection that Peter finally began to put all this together, and he finally understood that Jesus was indeed a different kind of king. And he was introducing in a different kind of kingdom. And so this idea of a not so with you leader begins with this question that I want to give you. Now, here's what I encourage you to do. If you're a leader of any type, you have any kind of influence, whether it's a parent or whether it's a boss, a teacher, whatever it is, we're going to flash this question up on the screen. And here's what I'm suggesting you do. You pull out your phone and you take a picture of this question, and then you make it your wallpaper so that every time when you're making a decision on what's the right thing to do, or I'm dealing with a situation, I'm dealing with this, you just touch your phone and you'll see the question. And here's this question. What can I do to help? You're like, Eric, get out of the way so I can take a picture. Hold on, I will. What can I do to help? I recommend you write this down, put it on your phone, whatever. You see, as a leader, I'm accustomed to people asking me that question. I walked in here this morning and Tahea, who's our service director, Pastor Eric, is there anything I can get you? What do you need me to do? Is there something you need? What can I do to help? But you know what? If I'm going to lead like Jesus, I've got to be the one that asks this question. What can I do to help? Because that's the question that Jesus asked when he gave his life as a ransom for many. What can I do to help? In other words, what can I do? How can I loan my strength? How can I leverage my power? How can I leverage my position, my influence, my resources for those who have none? And when you leverage your power, when you leverage your resources for the benefits of those who have less power and less resources, you're actually heeding the call of your Savior, because that's what he did. And here's how I know it. I want to go back to verse 50, verse 45, I believe. Yeah, verse 45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And when you lead from this posture, my favorite movie, it's one of my favorites, Braveheart. Remember when he says to the nobles, you think that your position gives you the right to have everybody kind of serve you, but I believe your position is for you to serve the people. That's the kind of leadership that Jesus is talking about. And when you leverage your power and you leverage your resources, not for yourself, but for those with less power and less resources, you are heeding the call of your Savior. You are a not so with you leader. Let's pray, because we've got the music going. Heavenly Father, I thank God that we're kind of like the disciples standing there on the Jordan River, and we have an option to turn around. I'm going to finish praying, but let me just say this to you. This is a tough call. This is a tough invitation. And many people turn around. They like to follow me at the beginning, but when the language gets to lay down your cross and follow me, some people say it's too tough. I can't do this. And that's that urge to preserve your life. And Jesus says you're not going to be able to do it. In fact, there was a man who was very rich, and he came to Jesus and he said, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And it says, Jesus looked at him and loved him and said, sell your possessions, give to the poor, and follow me. And he couldn't do it. So if you're sitting here this morning or you're watching online and going, this is too tough, I get it. But what's the options? The option is to preserve your life for self-preservation that in the end you lose anyway? Or would you be willing to heed the call and give it up so that you can find real life, real significance, and have something of significance at the end of your life? So Father, it's tough, but God, I just picture Peter and the disciples standing there and hearing this, and inside their mind, it's telling them to go back to Galilee and become a fisherman. But their hearts made them follow. God, I pray we do the same thing. The things that keep us from going all in, the things that keep us from dropping our nets, the things that keep us from being a not so with you leader, Lord, that we would heed the call and we'd be willing to understand that the power that we have, the resources we have, the influences we have, all of those things were given to us by you, but not for us, but so that we can leverage them to bring other people into the kingdom and show the love, how you loved us. You leveraged your resources and your power for us so that we could spend eternity with you and have a relationship with our Heavenly Father. Lord, that we would be able to do the same thing. And as tough as it is, we'd be able to choose to follow you and heed the call. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, we are in part 3 of our vision series for the year, Heed the Call. And today, what we're doing is there's my stools. Today, we are introducing our initiatives for the season. Now, if you're not familiar with our initiatives, every year we do initiatives twice a year. In the fall, we introduce initiatives, and usually they're local initiatives. We partner with people doing things locally, children and things like that. This last year, our initiative in the fall was to pay off the building, which we did, right? So, the one that we do this time of year is for our international initiatives, where we partner, and we actually ask them this question, our international partners, what can we do to help you? And then they will send us. Now, we kind of slowed down during COVID because a lot of our international partners had to come home to the United States during COVID, but now they're getting back into going. Things are going internationally. And so we've got some initiatives, and we're asking the question, what can we do to help? So before I bring Jessica up here to talk about our initiatives, let me say this. When we give towards these initiatives, what we are doing is we are leveraging our power and our resources for those who have less power and fewer resources. Now, you can do that anywhere, okay? You can do it anywhere. And I want you to hear my heart on this. This is what I want for you. I want you to be able to take that step and say, I'm going to heed the call and I'm going to leverage my power and resources for those who have less power and fewer resources. And you go, but if you think Shoreline has an agenda or whatever, then do it somewhere else. I don't care. I just want it for you because I know that when you live that kind of life and you heed the call, you are going to experience fulfillment. You're going to experience something that you can't otherwise. Like Jesus said, you try to preserve yourself, you're going to lose it. But those who give up their life for the sake of the gospel will truly find real life. But here's the other thing. By pooling our resources together, what we do is now we leverage. In other words, say we're a part of a group of churches that give $10,000 a year to missions. But if we're a part of 100 churches, that's, what is that? $100,000. That's a lot of money, a lot more. And that's what happens. It's like going to the gym, right? You can go work out yourself, but there's something that happens when you get in a class and you got other people there and you're motivated. That's how this works. When you decide, you know what? I'm going to leverage the resources that I have, and some of it's few and some of it's a bunch. And we're going to pull it together and we're going to accomplish something that's bigger than ourselves and accomplish something that we couldn't accomplish on our own. Now, before I introduce Jessica, let me just say this one more thing. You will notice that a focus of this year's initiatives, there's only 3, is that it's on the next generation. And if you've been in this church, we've been talking about passing the baton to the next generation, how important the next generation is. You know, we're developing leadership classes for your elementary students because that's how important the next generation is. So in our initiatives, we're gonna be focused on the next generation internationally with the partners that we've been working with. So Jessica, everybody welcome Jessica back up.
Hey guys.
And you've been given a card?
Yes, so I know it's kind of confusing because hosting came by, they handed you a bucket, but it's not for offering. We actually have something for you in it. So if you did not get a card and you want a card to kind of read along with us, just wave your hand in the air and a member of our host team will get one to you, and we'll have some out and available in the lobby as well after service. So with that, yes, we are doing Next Gen in a global focus, guys, and I could spend the whole hour talking about it because it's something that is
Can I have one of those cards? Anybody got
passionate, or I'm so passionate about. I can give you this one.
No, I got it. You need that one.
Okay. So there's going to be some pictures flashing up behind me, and they're just going to kind of be reeling through. But these are the 3 main focuses and organizations that we're going to be partnering with in this season. And these are not new organizations to Shoreline. We have had years and years of relationship with these organizations. So we have MAP 1040 and Indo Youth Center and Imani Malele. So I'll start with MAP 1040 to give you an overall view. Luke Walters is...
He's going to be speaking here July 2nd.
There you go. July 2nd, he'll be here, but he is one of the most joy-filled men I've ever met in my life. It's like Santa in real life. And you meet him, and he has this beautiful laugh and this joy for Jesus, but he goes internationally. And this year, they're really focusing in on Sri Lanka. And they've been praying, and they work with indigenous people on the ground to get out and get the gospel to these really hidden and off the beaten path places. We've raised money for motorbikes in the past. It's that same organization. And this year, their goal is to help impact 300 villages. And when you impact a village, that's legacy. Yeah. That's a big deal. So what you'll see on the card is you'll have kind of a quick note about what it is and then how you can be a part of it. It's an invitation into opportunity to truly be a part of something bigger at a global impact.
So $100 reaches one village.
Yes.
That's amazing. That's
you can bring the gospel to one village abroad in Sri Lanka for $100. And so the next is the Indo Youth Center. And so you see a map and you kind of see... we can't really give too much detail about this organization because we want to protect them because it is not safe to reveal where exactly they're working and what exactly they're doing. They've been in Shoreline before, they've visited, they're longtime friends of the house, and they're doing awesome work with the Next Gen over in Indonesia. So you'll see a couple things pop up like the map, and that's just kind of a glance of Indonesia because I can't really share
where they are.
Too many pictures and details, but I can always have a conversation. So if you want to ever talk with me, we can talk about it. But I will say that they're having great impact with the Next Gen. They create irresistible environments, including a cafe, much like our cafe, where you want the Next Gen to hang out and they want to be there. So they're looking to make a few upgrades to their cafe space to make it that much more inviting for the Next Gen to be there. They want to, similarly here, the kids are all hanging out at certain places because it's a good, fun, encouraging, inviting space. And that's what they want to do there. So they gave us a little wish list of items. And the cost for that new equipment is $5,000 to upgrade their systems. And then last but definitely not least is Imani Malele. I almost said it like you said it.
Milli Vanilli,
yes.
That's what I call him.
He says that all the time, and now it's in my head.
Because when you try to spell Amani Malele, spell check just...
Oh, it always
you
butchers
put Milli
it.
Vanilli in there and it's fine.
Always butchers it. So Amani Malele is a group that we've been working with since 2013 in Uganda, Africa, and they are going to be coming here in April,
Yes.
which is amazing. It's an organization that's near and dear to our personal family's hearts as well as the church. We've done so much with them, including there we
Building a
go.
school.
So we built that school, y'all. See that
Shoreline
school right
built that
there?
school, y'all.
We did that, and that was when a team of us went in 2019 to celebrate the school happening, and Pastor Donnie brought, of course, some volleyball net and balls, and we just literally had a party all day and celebrated what God did there, which is such a great thing that we get to be a part of. So I want to encourage you because they're coming in April. It's April 14th, I believe. It's a Friday, and they're going to be having a concert here, but they're going to be in our area for 2 weeks, guys. It's so cool what we get to be a part of. So through that, that school was built in a village called Lugazi, and in Lugazi, we're really honing in to try and impact that community specifically and those kids.
It's a great deal here. $30
Great deal.
buys 100 meals. I can't even get a meal for $30 in Destin.
Yes,
And 375 feeds every person at that school for one day.
yes. And just to give you a heads up, they get 2 meals a day at the center when they're in school, and then they have about 800. Sorry, I shouldn't say numbers. They have about 800 students at that specific center, and only about 80 have sponsorship.
Yep.
So we'll get to hear more about that when they're in town on what you can be a part of, but we're really honing in on that specific center because we've built a school there. We already have a relationship in that center, and it's really cool what we get to be a part of and how much our what is small to us can really impact at a global scale. It's such a big deal.
And just so you know, we're not taking an offering this morning. This is our initiatives, just like our initiative last year. At the end of the year, we went from September all the way to December. You have time for this. So you take this card home, you pray, you talk, and if you want to give to it, give to it. 100% of this goes to these initiatives. There's nothing
Yes.
coming to Shoreline Church. It's all going to feed people. It's going to take the gospel out to Sri Lanka. It's going to build that youth center that's reaching young people, students over in Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim population country in the world. So encourage you with that. And anything else?
Well, with that, on the back side of this card is how you can give.
Oh, that's important, huh?
Yes, it's important. It's the same way you can give like this all year long to our missions initiatives. You go to our standard giving page, and if you click down on the drop down, it'll show you missions and initiatives. And so whatever goes in there goes always straight out to our mission field, whether it be because we continually support these organizations in a different capacity all year long. This is their above and beyond. This is their additional ask of how we can really, truly help their mission. So there are ways to give it up there. This is a card that you can scan at your convenience. And like Eric said, we're not doing an offering right now. We truly want this to be an invitation into opportunity, not a sad puppy dog commercial where we tug at your heartstrings.
What's that girl's name that we could get to
I didn't
sing
want to
for us?
say it because we're online. And so...
What is it? Sarah McLaughlin.
So I just want to let you know that it's really cool to be a part of, to know that you can have global impact with your yes now.
Even the dogs in the commercial are like, wow, Sarah, that's a bit much, don't you think? I'm just a dog.
So with that, I want to thank you guys so much for being with us this morning.